Gosh, there's so much going on. And, I always talk about you in the context of having revealed so much about how we got here. And I do want to talk about what's going on today with the military going into American cities. And I want to get your take on all these things. But I'd love to just start with reminding people, in essence, it seems, I mean, in kind of an umbrella statement, you point out that Donald Trump was a concoction, in effect, of American media. There were a lot. There was complicity in both American media and American politics. Goes all the way to Biden and Garland, of course, but it extends well beyond that. And his sort of mafia instincts were well established. Well, David K. Johnston comes here every Tuesday, and we talk, and he's written volumes about it. But you also talked about it. So just I want to reset the table as to as well as you can in our short time how we got here, and then let's talk about what's going on.
Sure. Well, folks should read David K. Johnston's books. I reference them quite a lot in my own. And the fact that his books and his reporting are so old, as well as Wayne Barrett's, another reporter who covered Trump, going all the way back to the 1980s, this was all revealed in real time. Donald Trump has been a mafia associate for his entire life. He was first investigated by the Department of Justice in 1973. So we're on the, past the half centennial of that. He was trained by mafia lawyer and hard right-wing political operative Roy Cohn, one of the most influential and notorious operatives of the 20th century. He has deep ties and secrets within the business world, entertainment world, media, politics. He flirted with running for president numerous times. He was not a political neophyte in 2016. He had thought about running in 1988, thinking about starting up a campaign again in 1996, ran briefly in 2000, ran briefly in 2012, and then, of course, ran in 2016, and then again in 2024. So this is someone with lifelong political goals, surrounded by some of the most nefarious and dangerous people in the world, in America and in numerous countries, in particular Russia, Israel, Saudi Arabia. I could just go on and on. And so there was no attempt by our government to stop him from taking power in a meaningful way. And that, to me, is the more interesting story, because we all now know Trump's biography. We know what he's capable of. We don't know the full story of why all of these alphabet agencies and congressional figures and so forth did not do their job to protect the American public from his openly stated destructive goals.
Yeah, you point this out, too, in many of your writings. Everything with Trump is upfront. Yeah. That's part of what he does. You make this point repeatedly. Don't look for the hidden sleight of hand here. He is right up front with everything he wants to do and will do.
Yeah, I mean, in some respects, he's a bulldozer for other people's interests. And this includes transnational organized crime, the worst people in Silicon Valley, the Heritage Foundation, and other right-wing groups, on and on. So he's a very effective frontman for other people's operations. But in terms of just what is his plan? What does he want to do? He tells you over and over again. He confesses to crimes because in his view, it's not a crime if he does it. And that has always been something that he's outright stated. You could go back to the 2016 campaign with this infamous statement about shooting someone on Fifth Avenue and getting away with it. You could look at the times he confessed to obstruction of justice on national TV, twice to Lester Holt alone. This is not a subtle individual. And so when he was running for office again in 2024, one of the things that blew my mind is that the first time around, he could kind of get away with people falsely assuming that institutional norms and laws would hold, that the court and the Constitution would protect Americans from harm. We know that that's not true. It took a while for most Americans to catch on to that. But, we lived through 4 years of Trump already. Nothing was a hypothetical. And in 2024, when the Democrats were running and you ask, well, what's your plan, for example, if you lose? Like, what are you going to do to protect our country from an obvious authoritarian kleptocrat? And they would get so angry, like, how dare you ask us to have plans? How dare you ask us to do our jobs? And they are still that way. They're making little internet memes and, little jokes that do nothing to ward off the worst and most disastrous effects of this administration.
I mean, it feels like the horse is a little bit out of the barn, Sarah. I mean, maybe more than a little bit.
The horse's head is out of the barn. It's lying on our beds. But
Yeah, no, you're right, exactly. So now with the American military being drawn into all of this, this is Trump's dream to be able to assert himself. The irony is insane, right? I mean, a guy who got out of military service has never had an hour of public service in his life, and yet he is now the commander in chief of the military, and he uses the military as a prop. I mean, I remember in his first term when he sent the military to the south border because of the caravan coming in, a bunch of guys in jeans and torn t-shirts, and we have to send these military guys there at Christmas time. I thought, my God, this is insulting to those men and women who are in the military, and now you have them in Washington, D.C., and we have them picking up trash. Albert, you have those pictures of them picking up trash and they're, beautifying the city. It's crazy, but it's all to assert a power that he wants to assert well beyond Washington, D.C.
Yes, absolutely. I've been taking note of what cities he's been approaching first. And my theory about this is that he's going after the wealthiest cities in the country. I think he's hoping that wealthy people flee the country. He started with LA, went to DC, is, making a move on Chicago soon. He, of course, wants to command the capital for other reasons. It's not just an intimidation tactic. It's not just to stoke a culture of fear. It's so that he has them at his beck and call. And so this is the point where we have to see what members of the military will comply to, whether they are willing to carry out something akin to a massive Kent state level attack on American civilians, or, deny Americans their constitutional right to protest, to assemble, to speak out against not just this administration, but to speak out, for example, against the genocide, happening in Gaza, which is something that, Trump's administration has tried to criminalize and tried to, criminalize free speech about that. So he's putting all these pieces in place. And again, I wish that there was, a plan in mind, because it was fairly obvious he was going to do this. But, the last I saw was the mayor of DC, I think, thanking him for helping to clean up the city, which one is not what our military officials should doing. But also, this is the type of thing that, of course, happens in an autocracy where people are accustomed to security agents roaming the streets, violating their space, violating their sense of basic safety from the state. And now that is something that he's trying to normalize bit by bit by moving into one city after another.
Yeah, we're talking about the fact that he can say crime is down, and he can say, restaurant reservations are up, but the reality is actually to the contrary. Restaurant reservations way down, 60% down month to month. In other words, he's disrupted the rhythm of life in Washington because of this. The mayor of D.C., to your point, just actually admitted that Trump's involvement in D.C. has helped to lower crime. No, let me just explain that with you, Sarah, meaning, please toss in on this, but as my understanding, Washington, D.C. is waiting on a huge tranche of money from the federal government, okay? So you can't tell me that the mayor of Washington is going to say anything but exactly what's out of the hymnal, because she wants that money. We're talking about a ton of money for her city. So if you want that Fed money, you're going to say, yes, sir. Oh, my God, what a great idea, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, they'll do that. I just wish that they would learn from the other people that Trump has extorted, bribed, blackmailed, threatened, which includes, a large number of private citizens, elected officials, universities, media outlets. In the end, he screws you over anyway. He might grant you some sort of temporary reprieve while you kiss his ass, but he's going to do what he wants to do, what serves his goals. And it doesn't matter how nice you treat him. What will happen is that citizens will now trust you less. They won't necessarily see this as some sort of tactic meant to benefit them. They'll see, a extreme attack on their daily way of life, the sort of rights that they exercise on a regular basis. They'll see lies uttered by this administration because crime was never that high to begin with. They see attacks on immigrants. This is happening in tandem with ICE and its roundup of immigrants. And DC is a very immigrant heavy city. A lot of people are living in fear. So it never does any good to try to suck up to an autocrat. He will just screw you over in the end. And he's done this to so many people for so many decades that I wish at the least they would just preserve their integrity and their dignity if he's going to try to steal everything else.
Speaking of preserving integrity, put that picture back up, integrity and dignity. Look at the people behind Donald Trump in this picture. I mean, these are rank incompetence. You can start with Pete Hegseth, go to Kristi Noem, J.D. Vance with an agenda driven by Peter Thiel, and Pam Bondi, who, again, is in way over her head, and she's been put in charge of everything. And she's just really doing the president's bidding at justice. So I wanted to play for you something just in case people had missed it. I'm sure you saw it. The cabinet meeting, and there's a part of this also, isn't there, Sarah, where he doesn't want to do anything that's not on television. So he'd like all of his cabinet meetings, he'd like every meeting, the Putin meeting, all of it to be televised, because that's really what he is a performer. And so this cabinet meeting was just, check your self-esteem at the door and humiliate yourself as you prostrate yourself in front of this guy and tell him how great he is. But here's a supercut of it, and then we'll pick up where we were.
Haven't stopped by the Department of Labor. Mr. President, I invite you to see your big, beautiful face on a banner in front of the Department of Labor, because you are really the transformational president of the American worker.
Working for this government, for you, is the greatest honor of my life. I tell it to everybody, and I really do feel that way, and I thank you.
You have breathed life back into the profession of law enforcement.
This is just such a great opportunity, really, to recognize your leadership as a true champion for working people.
Well, Mr. President, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to work for you.
Our country has never been so secure thanks to you. You have brought us back from the edge.
And there's only one thing I wish for, that Noble Committee finally gets its act together and realizes that you are the single finest candidate since the this Nobel Award was ever talked about.
Yeah, that's Nobel, by the way. Right.
Oh God. I mean, I actually hadn't seen that before. I heard about it. I didn't feel the need to watch it because I spent 15 years of my life studying Uzbekistan and watching footage of Uzbekistan's meetings when Islam Karimov, their lifelong dictator, was in charge. And they were exactly like this. It was apparatchiks sitting around a table, praising the glorious leader. And you'll see this at any kind of autocracy. And, I want to be clear that America is down the road towards authoritarianism, but we're not fully there, or you and I would not be having this conversation. Things can still get worse. But this aspect of it was obviously something that, Trump was going to pursue. I don't know how they do it with a straight face. I'm assuming, a large amount of money contributes to their willingness to prostrate themselves in this manner. But, I think a lot of them, it's kind of ironic. Trump's lifelong strategy was always to run out the clock, on every single investigation of him, every single crime you either thought of committing or had committed, just run out the clock on the judicial process. I think there's a lot of folks waiting in the wings, running out the clock on Trump. Like Townsend says, they are waiting around for him to die. And so they are, especially Vance and people like Peter Thiel and others who are backing him, they're looking to move this country in a very nefarious direction. And I think they're willing to humor Trump while he's there because they're thinking ahead towards quite possibly even worse goals, to terrify your audience too much. But honestly, as much as I, despise Trump, the people behind him, the donors, the backers, the big money people, they are who I actually am more afraid of than Trump, who, as you said, he's a performer. He's a front man. He's not the ideologue behind this. He's vicious. He's sadistic. He's amoral, but he is not the sort of generative cause for, he's not the reason exactly all this is happening. He's the vehicle to how this is happening.
I want to get to Epstein in a second because it's the, it's the magic bullet in effect, maybe. But before I do, I just want to follow up on that. Are those, when you say it could get so much worse with the people who are behind him, is that the Christo-fascist movement? Is it, where is where, from a philosophical standpoint or from a strategic standpoint, politically, where is that group coming from?
I think it's techno-fascism. I think the people that I am the most afraid of are those who want to eliminate humanity, like literally eliminate human beings and replace them with AI. That is why they're pushing AI so hard. It's why they're not bothering with existential threats like climate change. It's why they're letting, childhood diseases for which there are vaccines and cures reemerge. It's why they're denying healthcare. They have no respect for the sanctity of human life. It's also why they support genocide. And so they see what's happening to our, environment. They see what's happening to our political structures, this weakening that's not just in America, all over the world. And they basically want to hoard resources for themselves and their small group. And they don't care what happens to the rest of us. It's just incredibly inhumane. It doesn't really have precedent because of the way it crosses geographical borders, because of the way it disregards the idea of the nation state. I don't think that they're interested in necessarily preserving the existence of the United States of America or of its people. That makes them different than dictators of the past who were very committed to wiping out certain subsets, certain ethnic groups within, the boundaries of their nation and then expanding the nation outward. Here, I think there's an alliance, a transnational alliance of really frightening individuals from around the world that are committed to sort of a broader extinction racket. It's half kleptocracy, half sadism. It does have a religious element a lot of the times. You'll hear people invoke the rapture or the apocalypse or other things to kind of justify their motivation. And they'll hold up things like fires and floods and whatnot as proof, as proof that like the Bible is accurate and the end times are here. You should not build, domestic or foreign policy around the rapture. It's a very bad idea. Unfortunately, it's one that is embraced by this administration.
It's funny. It seems as though like that's an extreme position. It's obviously extreme, but like, where does that come from? But Curtis Yarvin, who's one of these guys who they sort of their North Star, these tech bros, he talks about it openly, exactly the way you've spoken of it.
Only he likes it. He's like a big fan because he assumes he'll be, in the group that gets to hang around. I mean, I think the world that they're set to create is, vile, but, you still want to have the option of continuing to exist. And they want to deny folks that option.
So the Epstein crisis is something that is real. It has rocked the MAGA boat, obviously. It is something that haunts Trump, feels as though it's something he can't skate away from except to distract from, which he is doing fairly effectively, I guess. And David K. Johnston was saying on the show a couple of weeks ago that he really feels, first of all, that this is going to reemerge when Congress comes back, of course, and that this is something that Trump cannot escape, meaning he just, if it can be made to stick, that there really is no way for Trump to evade the effects of this.
Yes. I wrote 2 books about Epstein and also about Epstein's relationship with Trump. It's a significant part of Hiding in Plain Sight and of They Knew. I also wrote and They Knew about Epstein's predecessor, Craig Spence, who also did a child rape trafficking blackmail network. And in Hiding in Plain Sight, I wrote about Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and her father, Robert Maxwell, who was a spy for Israel. He got a very lavish Israeli state funeral, who was also connected to a lot of the same mafia operatives that Trump's connected to. And then, of course, there's the big one, which the documents, again, are in my book, Hiding in Plain Sight, which was a 2020 bestseller, where Trump was accused of raping a 13-year-old girl who was procured by Epstein. So again, none of this is new. What I experienced after publishing these books is that I was censored. I had once been regularly on cable news because I had written a book about Jeffrey Epstein. Suddenly I had to go, and I wasn't being censored by Republicans. I mean, that was sort of always there. I was newly censored by, networks and stations that were sympathetic to the Democratic Party. They did not want to talk about Jeffrey Epstein. They did not want any examination of this. I found this baffling for a number of reasons. One is that this is a horrific criminal. This is a rapist. This is a trafficker. Of course, you want to help his victims. Like, why would you not want to do that? Second of all, this is something that the entire country agrees is horrible. It's true that Trump's supporters have been following the Epstein case more attentively than the Democrats were, especially those who were in QAnon. In my book, They Knew, I write about how, the Republicans, in an attempt to try to divert all of that interest, came up with stuff like Pizzagate to try to say, this is to try to basically make anyone who looked into Epstein seem like some wild nut job who believed there were, child trafficking places and pizza parlors and things like that. Whereas the Epstein Maxwell case was real, real court cases, real indictments, real confessions, real victims. They wanted to bury the whole thing. So when it suddenly emerged, honestly, it scares me, because what I thought would happen is that Epstein would enter mainstream discourse when two things had happened. One was AI. One was AI with video and audio, so that if the quote Epstein files are released, if more information comes out, they'll simply deny it. They'll just say, oh, that's AI. That was made last week. This isn't real. We're now at a point far worse than a decade ago where people cannot tell fact from fiction. And there's so many, fake pieces of information floating out there. There's a real reason to challenge them. The other thing I feared is just total consolidation of power, where they thought that even Epstein, even this horror that the entire country can agree is just revolting and awful, it wouldn't actually necessarily bring him down. I think he certainly has lost a large chunk of his base. I watch them because our interests overlap. I've been following the Epstein case for a long time. They are disgusted. They feel betrayed. The Democrats who weren't aware of this because the mainstream media wouldn't cover it, they're also disgusted and they feel betrayed. So, we're united in betrayal. But, Congress and Trump and obviously the Republicans and the rest of them they do not seem to want to do anything meaningful about this, because I really doubt that this operation suddenly stopped with the alleged death of Jeffrey Epstein. I'm sure it's continuing, and the blackmail material seems to still have an effect on, controlling or conditioning the reactions of various officials.
Well, that last point you're making about the blackmail material seems perfectly relevant to what you're talking about, which is the idea somehow that these files would be released and then there'd be questions about their veracity, that kind of thing. But the reality is they may not be released for that reason, as you suggest. Like, there's just so much damning stuff in there on both sides. Clearly, it's Democrats and Republicans and a lot of powerful people worldwide, maybe ties to overseas or domestic intelligence organizations. There's an awful lot here, Sarah, right?
Yes. And, like I said, I've been studying this now for 10 years, and there's still information coming out recently that I didn't know about, and that other people like Julie K. Brown, who tracked Epstein and wrote about him for a long time, she didn't know about it. This guest book where Bill Clinton and Woody Allen and Trump and other people left messages for Epstein. There's new bits of information that seem to be, verified as real. I expect there to be ones that are not. They're going to try to muddy the waters. That's what they've always done with this case. I really wish that people would look at the historic antecedents for this. In particular, I wish they would look at Robert Maxwell and his life and his ties to various people in the Trump orbit, people like Iran-Contra figures, people like arms dealer Adnan Khashoggi. This was a little network that emerged in the late 1980s in which Trump was involved. And one of the people who helped eliminate any investigation into this network was Bill Barr. He did this under the first Bush administration in the late 80s, early 90s. Then, of course, returned for Trump to finish the job, with Epstein allegedly committing suicide in prison. Bill Barr's father, of course, is the person who brought Epstein into the fold of New York high society, hired him as a teacher at a very fancy private school, from which he moved into, the world of high finance and so on. So Bill Barr obviously had a personal interest in having this all go away. A lot of reporting nowadays omits this context. They omit that Maxwell was someone who was very important to Israel, especially during this period. They won't go there. I think they're afraid of a lot of the new speech regulations about Israel, but the whole thing needs to come out. It can't just be in little bits and pieces. It needs to be like a full and interconnected story, because as complicated and difficult as it may be, that's simply the truth of it.
You know, the adjunct to that is that Blanche meeting with Maxwell. So the number 2 person at the Justice Department goes down and meets with Ghislaine Maxwell, which on its face, just stop the music right there. Why is that happening? Why is that meeting happening? Unless there was all this, as they said, public interest in what she had to say. And then she comes forward with a statement that looked as though it was, scripted on cue cards. And we played the audio, and of course they had an interest in getting the audio out, which is another thing that's odd. Why do you play that audio? Why do you release that audio of Blanche and Maxwell? And then, again, this goes to what you were saying and what you've written about, which is the, in plain sight aspect of moving her to an even more minimum security prison. What is it, a day or 2 days after she makes that statement? Was insane. I mean, it just so clearly was quid pro quo.
Yeah, and it's the same thing that they did for Epstein. He never really went to prison. He had this very loose kind of house arrest. I think it's interesting that one of Maxwell's lawyers is Roy Cohn's cousin, from what I read. There's a lot of nepotism involved in these networks. You see it with the Trump family, the Kushner family, the Maxwell family, and now the Roy Cohn family. And the reason for that is that this is a mafia state, and mafias are very insular. So are dictatorships, but they need to keep those secrets. They need to be with people who can keep their mouths shut. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about actual conspiracies, actual plots, is that somebody will eventually spill. Someone will give up the game. They actually are very good at keeping their mouths shut for a very long time on certain subjects. And that frightens me. Trump occasionally will blurt things out about certain, crimes he committed, largely those in office. But I think because with Epstein, it's a matter of children and a matter of rape. And there's, sort of universal taboos that it doesn't matter who you voted for or what party you're in or whatnot. Everybody finds this repulsive and very upsetting to hear about, and they don't want to be associated with that. And I think that that's the thing, but that also prompts people to keep their mouths shut in uniform. And that disgusts me so much. That's the thing that I think people don't want to get out, is that not everybody adjacent to the Epstein case was somebody involved in it in the sense of they were a perpetrator, they were a rapist or a client or whatnot. They were witnesses. They were people who knew fully well it was happening. They did nothing to stop it, whether just as somebody that was observing, whether as a member of the media who didn't write a story, whether as an official who did not try to prosecute or do so in a timely fashion. They're all complicit. They're all guilty. And I think they know that the American public will be full of rage, both for the case in its own right, but also because it represents this broader culture of elite criminal impunity, where if you have a certain amount of money and you're in a certain network, you can do absolutely anything you want. And what they apparently want to do is rape children. And that is something that's so terrifying that's what you would do. You have billions of dollars. You could do anything you want in the world. That's what you're choosing to do. Why would anybody do that? Why would anyone go along with it and not try to bring it to a stop? It's hard for any normal moral person to comprehend it.
I mean, so many shattered lives. It really was horrors perpetrated over a long period of time by so many different people and so many interlocking pieces in that. And in our last minute or two, I want to pivot to finally Russia. Okay, Russia, Putin, and Trump. You've also written extensively about this, and I wonder if you could just give us your sense of what's happening. The Ukraine-Russia conflict obviously is the pivot point, but there may be more going on here between Putin and Trump.
Yeah, I mean, Trump is a Russian mafia asset, and he has been for a very long time. Trump Tower functioned in the 1980s as basically a dorm for the Russian mafia after they left the Soviet Union and needed a place to go. So Trump has been hooked up in this criminal network for, decades on end. What he's doing now in terms of his relationship with Putin, I think has to do with a variety of interconnected deals between dictators around the world. I think an agreement was made with Trump Trump for Putin to, quote, have Ukraine, basically be allowed to, illegally invade Ukraine and take the eastern part of that territory. And in exchange, Russia will hold back on, perhaps an Iran war. This is one of my fears, is that an Iran war is brewing, and that Russia, which would traditionally, defend Iran, perhaps is agreeing to hold its fire because Trump is very willing to give Ukraine. And that is how they see the world. They don't care about the Ukrainians living in Ukraine. They don't care about us living in America. They don't care about people, regular people anywhere in the world. And they will, take land, take resources, take money. It's a mafia network that runs on theft and impunity.
So his inability to get a deal, the real idea there is just to stall to allow Putin more time to win the war of attrition, or what's your take on that?
I think that's part of it. I also think that there are a lot of oligarchs and plutocrats who enjoy watching Ukrainians and Russians kill each other. They enjoy the weakening of both militaries because then it makes it easier for, corruption to thrive in the midst. And if, whole cities, whole regions are destroyed, then they can go in afterwards and look for, certain valuable minerals, take over land. Ukraine is famous for its soil. I think that there are kind of outside, really vicious, predatory people doing this. Trump was trained by corporate raiders. He was mentored also by people like Carl Icahn, who had this philosophy of you break things, you destroy things, and then you buy them on the cheap. That is how he views countries. That is how the people around him who are advising him view countries as well. And the people who get killed or hurt in that situation, they don't matter to them at all. They're just incidental.
So as you game out this Ukraine-Russia thing, you think with all those interests to which you've referred, it's likely that we won't see a cessation of hostilities for a while?
I don't know how long this will go on, because while there's, kind of, I don't want to say fake things, but I think there's a sort of mafia war, an internal war that maybe we're not seeing the full scope of. We're also seeing actual Ukrainians fighting for their land, fighting, with great determination, and they're not going to just sit back and let it be stolen. And then we also have Russia doing, the typical thing that an imperialist dictatorship does, where, they have claimed this territory as theirs. They have deemed it Russian. They're not going to back down either. And the Russian population feels that way as well. Like I said, I don't think these plutocrats and oligarchs are particularly concerned with public opinion, but that doesn't mean that, people within these militaries share the goals of those oligarchs. They might be fighting for a completely different cause, and that's going to complicate whatever kind of objectives the, puppet string masters might have. Is that, there are people underneath this, those people don't matter to them, but people matter to each other, and their countries matter to them, and they will fight for their countries in various ways. But, the casualty count is growing, and, it did not end under Biden. I think the best way to have ended this would have been quick, but it's been drawn out for a long time, and I think they must see some advantage in that, as grim as it is. So I really can't say. It's hard to say.
Just to follow up on the last thing you said, and then I'll let you go. You feel as though Biden held back on offensive weapons, or in essence, he kind of kept them on the defense?
Yes, I think so. I mean, he seemed to know, or at least it's not even really him, it's his foreign policy staff, that this war would drag on unless Ukraine was adequately armed to fend off the attack, that Russia would continue to, move further into Ukrainian territory. I think Ukraine surprised everybody by fending them off as strongly as they did, especially in those first few weeks where people were, they're expecting like Kiev to fall, and it didn't. And so that was an opportunity, I think, to bolster Ukrainian military initiatives. And, I want to be clear, like, I do not support any war. I would rather this not be happening at all. I take no enjoyment out of any of this. But if there's a clear-cut war, if there's a clear-cut case of, there's an outside force invading and people would like to defend themselves, it is Russia and Ukraine. And I don't think that America did an adequate job of understanding that dynamic or respecting, the willingness of Ukrainians to sacrifice for their country. And as a result, a lot of lives have been lost that I don't think needed to happen. happen. I think all around it's just a tragedy. And one more thing I'd like to add is that on the Russian end, Russia, under Putin, has been sending out ethnic minorities, from its territories to fight this war. They've been using them as basically, people to take the fire while they just kick back and enjoy the riches and the conquering of territory. So it's a tragedy for Russia as well.
Sarah Kendzior, just such a fan. And look at this, everybody. Dang, bring Sarah on weekly, says Scott. Yeah. How about Sarah Kendzior is wonderful, says Cassidy. Yeah, you're going to see tons of this. It's unreal. Several. Can Sarah be a weekly guest, please, says Joy. You really are terrific. I know your schedule's busy, but we'll put the call out again and hope that you can come through a little more frequently than we've seen you in the past. We'll have links to all of your books and your Substack, where I am a full-fledged member at the Substack as well. So again, I'll have links under this video, and I wish you all the best and the best to your family, whom I've read about in your latest book. And I'm looking forward to the next time. Thanks, Sarah.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for having me back.
All the best. Sarah Kendzior, everybody. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.